Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA stories. In this video, a vindictive homeowner association hired a company to cut down my tree that then fell on my house and destroyed it. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is titled, Neighbor Destroyed My Property. So my wife and I bought 18.5 acres of heavily wooded semi-old growth forest in north central Florida approximately 1 year ago. I myself am a beekeeper and I bought the property for my future honey production and because I could control what plant varieties should dominate the land. 50-plus-year-old basswoods, rare in Florida, were all over the southwestern portion of my property and I could not wait to make a huge honey crop on my front doorstep. A real beekeeper's dream. Skip forward a few months and I went out to the property 1 hour away to check things out. My beautiful basswood dominated southwestern portion of property had been destroyed. 30 by 300 foot of my property had been completely cleared and all debris was pushed into massive dirt/wood, cannot burn, piles all along where they had cleared. I got a hold of my neighbor and began to demand that she stop this immediately and that she was actually on my property, not hers. She began to weave a web of lies, everything from she'll buy me replacement trees to she will give me cash outright and stop clearing. My first child was then born and I was absorbed into that whole world for several months. Skip forward a few months and I come back out to the property to check on some things. Not only did she not quit working on her driveway, she had lime rock laid and compacted, a utility line up on my property without any easements, and a 53-foot metal container halfway on my property. So we were forced to purchase a second survey within a year and have them clearly mark everything out. We are extremely poor and had budgeted almost exactly for the survey, septic, well, utility line and permits. The second survey set us back too much to afford everything and we are forced to rent and pay mortgage as opposed to move out to our property with RV and just pay the mortgage. On a side note, I'm doing all my land clearing by hand and plan on building my house by myself. Anyhow, the bottom line I guess is that she destroyed my property and my livelihood. Approximately 45 12-inch plus trees were cut and dumped onto my property. Mostly dumping everything under my 200-plus-year-old live oak, so I cannot burn it without moving it. The septic company that cleared it did it under a guise independent of their septic company and are claiming that they are not responsible. The homeowner says it's the land clearing company's fault and they are also not liable. And to complicate it even further, the owner is like 90 years old and her daughter orchestrated everything. Meanwhile, I've lost such a large sum of money over the next 30+ years in honey income, it is hard to stomach. I'm kinda lost and not sure of what to do going forward. I cannot afford to hire someone to move their container. If we hire a lawyer, then it will break my bank and my property will be that much further from being a reality. I don't understand how so many contractors and engineers can do this without even referring to any surveys. What can I do here? Where to go for answers? Thanks for your time. And then someone in the comments said, I'm not a lawyer, but I've dealt with some property disputes in the past. The first thing you need to do is gather all the evidence you can, take photos and videos of the damage, the container and the utility line. Keep records of any communication you've had with your neighbor and the septic company. The more documentation you have, the stronger your case will be. Next, I highly recommend consulting with a real estate attorney. They specialize in these kinds of disputes and can give you a clear idea of your rights and options. I know it can be expensive, but many attorneys offer free or low-cost initial consultations. It's worth it to get professional advice before taking any further steps. If you want to avoid a legal battle, you could try mediation too. A neutral third party can help you and your neighbor come to a mutually agreeable solution. This can save you a lot of time and money in the long run, but if your neighbor and the septic company refuse to cooperate, you might have to take legal action to get compensation for the damages and loss of potential income. Hang in there, OP, stand your ground and don't let him get away with destroying your property. Keep pushing forward with your plans for the land and don't forget to take care of yourself and your family during this stressful time. Comment number 2, damn OP, that's a really crappy situation, no pun intended with the septic company. I'm no legal expert, but I've got a buddy who's a real estate lawyer. Here's what he would probably tell you. First off, document everything, take pictures, videos and keep a paper trail of all communications. This will be your best friend if you end up in court. Secondly, send a formal demand letter through your lawyer to your neighbor and the septic company. Outline outline all the damage they caused and what you expect them to do to make it right. This shows that you mean business and can be used as evidence later on. If they still don't cooperate, it's time to bring in the big guns, file a complaint with your local building department or zoning board. They might issue fines or citations for the unauthorized work on your property. And if that does not light a fire under their asses, you might have to sue for damages and lost income. I know legal fees can be a witch, but look into legal aid societies or attorneys who work on contingency. They might take your case without you having to pay up front. Most importantly though, don't let this consume you. Update to the story. Hey everyone, I wanted to give you an update on my situation. First off, I want to thank you all for your advice and support, it really helped me. After reading through your comments, I decided to take some action. I spent a couple days documenting everything. I took photos and videos of the damage, the container and the utility line. I also gathered all the communications I had with my neighbor and the septic company. Next, I found a real estate attorney who offered a free initial consultation. She reviewed my case and agreed to take it on a contingency basis, which was a huge relief given my financial situation. Following your advice, I had my attorney send a formal letter to my neighbor and the septic company outlining the damages and our expectations for a resolution. We also filed a complaint with the local building department about the unauthorized work on my property. To my surprise, the demand letter and the complaint seemed to do the trick. The septic company agreed to remove the container and utility line from my property at their own expense. They also offered to pay for the removal of the debris they had dumped on my land. My neighbor was a bit more difficult to deal with, but after a few rounds of negotiation through our attorneys, we reached a settlement. She agreed to pay for the replacement of the trees that were cut down and to have her driveway rerouted off my property. It was not quite the full compensation I was hoping for, but my attorney advised me that it was a reasonable compromise given the circumstances. In the end, honestly, I am just relieved to have the situation resolved. It's been a stressful few months, but I feel like I can finally move forward with my plans for the property. I'm still going to have to work hard to make my beekeeping dreams a reality, but at least now I can do it without this legal battle hanging over my head. And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments whether you still enjoy r/legal advice. I think every now and then it's a really interesting subreddit, especially when the comments are so helpful as in this one. And the title story is called "Vindictive HOA Karen Hired a Company to Illegally Cut Down the Tree in My Garden." Vacation is the one chance we as adults get to maybe spend just a few days with no larger concern than where were we going to indulge at dinner tonight or what movie we might see in theaters tomorrow. I set aside a long weekend to head a couple of hours away and spend some time with a few good friends of mine. I needed the rest. After all, I've had a lot of things stressing me out this last year. I have lived in my home for 3 years now and I knew all about how annoying the HOA president, Karen, could be. However, I must have not been on her crap list before this year. I couldn't tell you what exactly happened. I just know that one day we had a strained but functional relationship and the next I could not delay mowing my yard for an extra day without getting a citation from her. Early on in this difficult year, Karen locked onto a certain tree in my yard. This tree is old and an absolute beauty. It had certainly been here before this housing development had, and most of the neighbors I spoke to thought it positively impacted the image of the neighborhood. Unfortunately, it had some roots that reached beyond my property line and branches that hung out over it as well. Some of it reached into my neighbor's yard, and when Karen brought up her initial complaints, my neighbor backed me up and said that it didn't bother her at all. Some of the branches do reach out over the sidewalk though, and because that is public property, the citations came. I got at least one a month and fought each one at the HOA meetings, where I was able to get the fines dismissed about half the time. The other half the time I had to pretty much double my dues. At this point it was not about the money though. The area I live in is not cheap and I worked my ass off to own this house. I'm successful in my career and I'm not gonna let Karen boss me around and get me to cut down a tree that not only brings me joy but brings the rest of the HOA joy as well. I've seen Karen go on the crusades before, and the fact that she gives up just proves that I can be more stubborn than her. Still, it was all so stressful that I needed this long weekend. Especially with autumn coming and my problem tree starting to lose its leaves over the sidewalk, sending Karen off into an aneurysm if you were to buy into the over-the-top nature of her tantrums. I had been sweeping the sidewalk and raking the leaves for the last few weeks, and before I left I did it one last time to make sure that everything was in tip-top shape. A few days surely could not lead to any issues, right? right? Wrong. I guess it was silly of me to mention it to anyone that I was taking a vacation because Karen got to work the moment she heard that. So I'm arriving back from my vacation only to find 2 trucks with an abundance of equipment filling my driveway, so I cannot even park there. One more has taken the liberty of driving through my meticulously cared for lawn, so it is near the tree. I am mostly just confused until I actually take the time to read this side of the truck. XYZ Tree Removal Company. I barely get my car into the park up against a curb before I dash out of it and to the tree. Karen is having a friendly chat with a guy who's wearing a hard hat and gloves in his pocket as if he can act like he helps out with the work if he just puts on some PPE. Meanwhile, his workers are halfway through securing the tree so they can control its fall with their truck. Stop, stop, stop! Everyone get off my property! I yell as I get up close to them. I have not given anyone authority to be working on my property. Karen sneered and spoke with her nasally voice she uses anytime she is talking down to someone. You don't need to give them authority if you're against the regulations of the HOA. It's important that we all strive to give our neighborhood the best image possible. Your tree has been an eyesore for a while, but you cannot even keep it contained within your property, so it's forfeit. That's ridiculous. Everyone but you agree that it makes the neighborhood look better. Now get off my property or I will call the cops, I reply. Oh, that's terrifying, Karen said. She turned back to the tree removal boss. I think we might as well get this done so we don't have OP trying to bother the police. The boss guy nodded at her and told his workers to get to chopping. The workers immediately protested that the tree was not fully secured, and in a tight neighborhood they risked a lot if they were not certain that it would behave how they wanted. The boss proved that he had no clue how to do the actual work and knew plenty about verbally abusing his workers though. He started cursing at them for disputing him. I had the cops on the line by the time he finished yelling at them. Some of my neighbors had come out to their front yards to spectate on the wild events going on. I think I even saw my next door neighbor who had the roots go across her property line, recording on her phone. I still feel bad for the workers. Between being verbally abused and seeing that I was calling the police on them, I know that they were not in the right state of mind to do their best work. I wish they had stood their ground in the moment though, and this would have all cleared up. I could have taken Karen to court for simply harassment. Either way it went, I guess the workers had the chance of losing their jobs, so what do I know? The workers set to cutting the tree, and they took their time trying to cut it, but it simply was not secured correctly, and Karen and their boss just kept screaming, so I'm amazed that they had room for thoughts in their head at all. The cops pulled up just in time for me to hear the creaking of the tree falling. I saw the direction it was tipping and only had time to scream, "No!" before it popped like a gunshot and the tree came crashing down onto my house. The tree had crushed a wall that sat between the kitchen and the master suite, completely opening my home to the elements. To make it better, it weakened a load-bearing wall, so the entirety of my master suite and all my possessions I had in there had the ceiling collapse on them. Honestly, I think I would have attacked Karen and come to regret it if the cops had not put on their sirens and immediately taken control of the situation. As I started to get prepared for my next steps in the hotel room I was forced to stay in, I had to stop myself from regretting that I did not bring harassment charges down on Karen sooner. As much as she stressed me out and annoyed everyone in the neighborhood, she had been given the authority and the charges would not have changed anything. If anything, they probably would have just ended up accelerating the issues. I spoke to a lawyer and had my suspicions confirmed when he told me that our best bet moving forward would be to sue for the physical damages, as the contracts gullible idiots like me sign when they join HOAs often make it hard for emotional harassment charges to stand out. If anything, they make physical damage lawsuits even easier. Anyway, the lawyer is the expert, so I let him take charge. When I show up to the court, the lawyer tells me that he asked for and received a warrant for seizure of Karen's communications with the tree removal company. In those conversations, it was revealed that Karen knew the tree removal boss because he owns multiple companies that she has used to maliciously enforce her decisions as HOA president. In their conversations, malicious intent was able to be proven, as Karen stated outright that she did not even mind the tree, but she thought that having a 30-year-old bachelor who never brought girls home in the neighborhood would just attract gays like flies. I'm grateful that this at least happened to me, because I cannot believe how disheartening it would be to see this crap if I actually were gay. As it is, it just makes me feel more vindicated in bringing down real consequences on this Karen and all her bigotry and harassment. It's a dream come true when the court awards me $500,000 for all the property and emotional damages. I'm quite a bit miffed to see that Karen was gonna walk away with fines and not even be removed from her position by the court though. Then again though, I was pretty sure this would be enough to have the HOA remove her themselves. At least she would have been able to do as much if she could have had the same self-control I did. In her case, it should have been easier anyway. I mean, she was surrounded by police and standing in front of a judge, and still, when all was said and done, she just could not stop herself from throwing herself at me to attack me when I was hugging my lawyer so we could celebrate. I guess she couldn't stand seeing two men show any affection to each other. The next one is a malicious compliance story, and it is very satisfying. I'm a senior electrical engineer in the industrial sector. I started work at a huge firm a few weeks ago, and right off the bat my superior detailed what was expected of me every quarter. Among the requirements were one safety violation report a month. I thought okay, I could keep myself from effing up more than once a month. This is a large factory with everything from spinning grinders to steaming corrosives, so obviously OSHA is a big issue here, but this is not my first rodeo, so to speak. I generally know what I'm doing, so my first month goes by and I keep everything nice and safe. End of month, one-on-one rolls around. Boss makes it clear to my surprise that the requirement is for me to file at least one safety violation a month. Obviously, I inquired how one could go about controlling safety violations, as they are inherently accidents, and if I had any way to influence their appearance, I would obviously prevent them in the first place. But he just said I need to keep my eyes open, the violations will appear. Fine, so I kept my eyes open, but honestly, everything seems perfectly in order. Everyone else in my department were ticking off safety violations one after another, and I was nearing the end of month 2 with nothing. I'd go on walks looking for safety infringements instead of working. Something just seemed off, so I looked into the safety violations report Pexel, and I was just stupefied. This was a list of the most unbelievably inane infractions I've ever set my eyes upon. I'll give you some examples. Infraction: cabinet door was left open in the room. Someone could hit their head. Immediate mitigation: cabinet door closed. Future mitigation: add magnets to cabinet doors. There were countless other esoteric reports like unexplained puddle next to electrical cabinet or stack of cables on the floor. I simply couldn't believe it. These well-educated grown men and women just writing nonsensical safety violations on absolutely anything. I tried approaching one of the guys about it, but he just said to keep my eyes open, the violations will appear. They keep repeating it like it's a mantra and then change the subject. I thought this was ridiculous enough, but then one day a report came in about a ladder missing one of the plastic caps on its legs. Immediate mitigation: plastic cap found elsewhere and secured in its place. Now, I was the last one to use this ladder the day before, and it was perfectly fine, which led to my conclusion that this man was purposely sabotaging company equipment just so he can fix it and then write a safety violation report. I feel like I am in an episode of The Office. Everyone I approach about this just brushes it off. Maybe it's because I'm the new guy. Anyway, I could not show up to my second monthly evaluation sun safety report, so I went to a random grounding cable, slightly unfastened the bolt, took a picture, and then fastened it back in place. I wrote a report about it, and the OSHA guy commended me in person about my vigilance. Is this a department-wide grift? Are the managers unaware of this farce, or are they playing along? Usually this would be a huge red flag, but everyone is otherwise really nice and the pay is great. Anyway, ideas as to what I should sabotage next month are welcome. And the next one is titled Pro Revenge. So I was working at a major fast food chain. The restaurant was a franchise, and the franchise owner, let's call him Mike, owned multiple franchise locations across the city. Below him there was the guy who dealt with the day-to-day operations of the locations, let's call him Jeff. Now, at my restaurant there was the general manager, who I'll call Carmela, and multiple shift managers. I worked there for only about 4 months before I secured a better job. I turned in my 2-week notice directly to Carmela. I specifically stated a date in which my employment will end and had a short conversation with her confirming the details. Come my final week, I was scheduled the day before the date I had listed on my notice. Carmela, or Carmela, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, also went off on vacation that week and put a shift manager in charge of scheduling and keeping track of hours. When I showed up for work on my last day, I went to clock in and was unable to do so. Apparently, I was removed from the login system a day short of when I was supposed to be. No problem, I'll just record my clock times manually, and I worked my shift like normal while recording my clock times on a piece of receipt paper. At the end of my shift, I had the shift manager post the receipt paper on the corkboard, and he sent a message to Carmela to adjust my hours accordingly, since I couldn't clock that day. The total time I worked was around 5 hours. I took a picture of the receipt paper showing my hours posted on the corkboard, so I was sure I had proof that I was there. Come payday, Jeff was there, and I personally turned my uniform into him and picked up my check. I've always kept a very accurate record of my hours and discovered that my paycheck was short the exact amount of time I worked on my last day. I immediately brought it to Jeff's attention and gave him a rundown of what happened. He gave me his phone number to text him the whole situation and sent him the picture I took so that he had it written down. He told me he was gonna get it figured out and follow up with me. Over the course of a couple of weeks, I followed up multiple times with no response. I felt at this point the wait was getting ridiculous, so I got into contact with HR for the restaurant's corporate operations. I was basically told that since I worked at a franchise, there was nothing they could do and that I had to get in contact with the franchise owner directly. After failing to find contact info for Mike, I decided to go to the labor board for help. The labor board informed me that since they didn't pay me in full for the hours worked, I was entitled to back pay of 8 hours every day they didn't pay me up to 30 days. The labor board opened a case and immediately started attempting to contact the franchise owner, but to no avail. Eventually, they sent a letter to the franchise owner's home address directly, and I received a call from Mike on a Friday asking me why the labor board is going after him. I gave him a complete rundown on everything that happened, and he told me that this was the first time he had heard about the situation. We arranged to meet at the restaurant a few days later. When we met, we had a very open conversation on my time there. I told him everything about issues that were arising with managers all the way to not being able to clock in on my last day. At this point, if the labor dispute went to court, he would be looking at thousands of dollars in back pay due to how long it was taking to get it sorted out. We agreed to settle it for around $500. I felt on top of the world because my missing wages was only $45 or so. I visited the restaurant a few weeks later and found out that since the case was settled, a lot of things changed. Come to find out, Carmela and Jeff were hiding the case from Mike by destroying the letters and not responding to the calls from the labor board. They were also preventing contact with Mike by removing his contact info from the break room and refusing to make it available to employees. Mike fixed all of that by permanently posting his info in the break room and even set up a 1-800 number that he posted behind the register so that if any customers had complaints, they can submit a complaint to him directly. I'm not sure what happened with Jeff and Carmela, but I know the management was rearranged due to the issues I brought up with him in our conversation. Evidently, my new job was at a major drugstore chain that Carmela used as her pharmacy. A few months later, while I was working, Carmela came in and noticed I worked there. Shortly after, I found out from the pharmacy department that she started going to the pharmacy of another location. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripestories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.